Thank you for joining us. I'm Marshall Ramsey, and we're featuring actress Aunjanue Ellis on this edition of Conversations. Aunjanue's had a remarkable acting career, being featured in television and movie roles like The Mentalist, The Help, and Men of Honor. And more recently, she was featured in the BET's miniseries Book of Negroes. But what you don't know about Aunjanue is that she grew up in Macomb, Mississippi, and still lives in Macomb, Mississippi because of her love for family in her community. And in this conversation with MPB Sharita Brent, you'll find out Aunjanue Ellis is a woman of strong passion that extends well beyond family and stage.
Talk to us a little bit about your experience being raised in Mississippi. Were you raised by your grandmother?
Yes, I was. I was raised by my grandmother. I came to Mississippi when I was 3 years old. And my grandmother raised me, and my mother came along, and so the two of them did the best that they could, yeah, with me. In Macomb, Mississippi, and went to school at South Pike High School, went to school a couple years at Tougaloo, and then went from there.
Some of your inspiration for acting kind of began in the church. You know, you said you did some plays, and you liked the response that you got from people in the church. So would you say the church is where you got your initial inspiration for acting?
In our church, New Home Baptist Church, you had to say speeches, you had to quote scripture, you had to be in the Easter program, you had to be in the Christmas program, you were either playing Mary or Joseph or the baby. So that sort of gave me that outlet, you know. And I remember saying this speech at for Easter one time, and it was about the crucifixion. It was Easter, so it was about the crucifixion, and I just got really involved in it and just felt really connected to it. And my grandfather was a minister, and I think preaching is an art form, and so the response that I got after I did that speech was akin to how the response that ministers get when they preach. Now, I knew I was not going to be a pastor or a preacher. I knew that was not my fate, but I did feel that call and response that we talk about in, you know, African American churches. I did feel that call and response, and I just didn't know how that would articulate itself in my life.
Yeah. So by the time you got to college, you started off at Tougaloo, and then you would initially end up at Brown University. So for you, is that where you really began to take acting seriously in your college years?
No,
Okay.
I didn't. I met someone, his name is Jim Barnhill. He's a Hattiesburg native. And he came to Tougaloo. He's a professor at Brown. And he came to Tougaloo to teach for a semester, and he directed a play. And I was encouraged to audition by some friends of mine, and I went and auditioned, and he cast me in the play. And he said, you know, you should consider this. And I said, okay. And he said, you know, I think you should come and leave Mississippi and try to do this seriously. And so I did, and I still was not serious. Mm-hmm. I just did it. I was 19, you know, hey, why not?
Yeah.
Then I started having conversations with myself about, is this something that I want to do? Brown is a place that it thrives off actors and creativity, and that's what it does. I mean, there were people that I was going to school with who were actually professional actors, that I had seen them in things. So it was no joke for them at all. So brushing up against them made me see a little bit of the possibility, but it really wasn't real for me. And then Mr. Barnhill said to me, you need to go to graduate school. And so I applied for graduate school at NYU, and I got in. I started working before I finished school. And I think that is essentially why I continued to try to act, because if I had to go out in the world and do it without having already had an income coming in, I don't know if I could have done that.
Well, you touched on schools, so let's chat a little bit about Mississippi and the state of education. We know that the dropout rate is high. It's of a great concern here in Mississippi. Like 1 in 4 students drop out of high school before graduating. Some of the issues are dealing with academic performance or not having parental engagement. So talk to us about your thoughts on the value of education. Do you think parental engagement is important? What would be your thoughts on that?
Well, I know that because I went to school is the reason why I'm here talking to you right now. There's no other way to say it. It's just the truth. Now, I will say this though. By the time that I got to, I'd say 10th or 11th grade, the zeal that I had, the excitement that I had about going to school every day, which is how I was when I was in the 8th grade and studying and looking at history books, and I was such a dork, and I was like, if I just read 5 more pages, I'll be 5 more pages smarter.
Yeah.
I was that kid, But by the time I was 10th, 11th grade, all that was gone. And I think that there was probably a little bit of a frustrated artist inside me, and I didn't know how to articulate that or tell anybody that. I knew that when I was in the 7th grade, I wrote this piece in my 7th grade class, and my 7th grade teacher didn't encourage that at all. It didn't make sense to her. And I think that I remember that to this day. And I think that students need encouragement more than we realize, and the dropout issue, the dropout problem is not something that I would ever call myself an expert on or anything like that. But I know what it was like for me when I didn't want to go to school. And what I was experiencing was I didn't feel that the creative person inside of me was being nurtured. And I'm sure a lot of students feel that way. If I felt that way and I was a motivated student and had, essentially great grades, imagine a kid who is not the best reader in the world or is not the best mathematician in the world. This school dropout problem is not a problem that's going to work if we see it as a segregated issue, that it's the parental responsibility, it's a school responsibility, it's a community responsibility. It really is going to take all of us trying to figure out solutions. And one thing that I will say is I met a young woman in Savannah, in Atlanta. She's going to the Savannah School of Art and Design and College of Art and Design there, and she is from Tylertown. And she talked about how she felt like she had to leave Mississippi because because of what she wanted to do, and she wanted to be a creative person. I think that a lot of creative people feel that. Now there are wonderful schools. There's JPAC that's happening that's in Macomb, and I think there's a great school in Brookhaven. So there are places, but if you don't know how to express that, if you don't know how to say, I know why I can't concentrate, it's because I don't think like everybody else. My mind is I have a more abstract way of thinking, and that really is a creative brain. And I think a lot of students here who have those kinds of brains the way that I did, if they don't feel like it's supported, if they don't feel like it's nurtured, they feel like they have to leave Mississippi. Now, if they don't feel like Mississippi is an option, they feel like they have to leave school. So we all have to do what we can do to target those students, find them, and try to hold them in whatever way we can. And that's gonna take all of us doing that.
And one of the things that is like a deciding factor for when students decide to drop out is their academic performance. And so some of them feel like, well, I'm not doing good enough, maybe I don't belong in school. And so, and you said you left Mississippi at like 19 to go pursue your dreams. But for a lot of children, that might be students. It might be a fear of failure, a fear of not having direction. So what would be your suggestion for students not to get lost if they do decide to take that leap and leave Mississippi? What are your thoughts on still staying grounded and knowing what you're trying to do? Do you think having a plan?
Well, I think the first thing is we have to say, as Mississippians, we don't want people to leave Mississippi. Mm-hmm. So we have to give them a reason to stay. Mm-hmm. And and I think that takes we have to like evaluate our culture and figure out what are we doing as a state that there's this exodus, that we have this brain drain, that we have this people who don't want to come here to work, who don't want to come here. And if they do come here to work, they're on the first thing smoking to go back to where they live. There are a lot of movies that are being shot here in Mississippi now, and I think that's great. But the reality is these people, they come to work, but they leave. They're not going to stay here and help build our communities, So we have to figure out as a state, as a community, an assembly of communities, what we can do to retain our best talent, why do people want to leave, And there are things about the state that I love. I mean, I live here. I'm not sitting here talking. I came from Macomb, Mississippi. I drove here this morning. I live here. My family's here, and that's why I love it, because my family's here. But everybody doesn't feel that way. Everybody doesn't feel welcome. And I think that when you are a creative person, and I can speak about this because I'm a creative person, I feel that meeting that woman in Atlanta yesterday, a couple of days ago, she speaks to what a lot of people feel, that the assumption is you have to leave here in order to be a creative person. And that's a shame. Mm-hmm. So we have to do something to say, no, you can stay here. You can be here in Mississippi and be a creative person and write and act and be in radio and we'll support you. Like we will support you.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned the culture of Mississippi, and I think overall the perception of Mississippi being conservative and things not really changing is some of the reason that people feel the need to get out, almost like they want to escape and be free. I don't know, from Mississippi, but I wanted to touch just a minute on something that kind of sparked some controversy. There was a billboard that had "We Shall Overcome" on a Confederate flag, and I saw the news story, and there was a lot of confusion about it, and I understand that you were associated with it. Did you purchase the billboard?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so tell us what was your mindset, what message was it that you wanted to convey with that? People made their surface assumptions of what it meant, and there was like an outrage, but nobody really tried to explore what it meant or what it was trying to say, so maybe you can tell us.
What I was saying is the billboard was the words "We shall overcome," and I had every stroke of the words written in a Confederate flag, and I had dual sort of responses to it. White Mississippians are, conservative Mississippians, I'm not going to say white, conservative Mississippians, said things like, I'm just stirring up trouble, and, why would I, do something like that? Everything is, why stir up trouble? And then some Black Mississippians who were outraged by it with me for doing that, they thought that I had desecrated something special. And I appreciate both those responses. And the reason that I did it is because I wanted a response. We've been silent on this problem here for too long. And we have to talk about it. we have to talk about it. We owe it to those kids who we want to keep in school. We owe it to them, because those students who don't just leave school, they leave Mississippi, they're just leaving. And if they think the way that I thought, they feel unwelcome. And for me, that flag makes me feel unwelcome. We are building a civil rights museum here. And what's striking to me is that when Ms. Evers went up to the groundbreaking ceremony, she was flanked by Confederate flags. Now, this is a widow of a civil rights movement, of a civil rights leader, and there are going to be pictures of Mr. Evers in the museum, documents that are testament to his journey and the journey of so many other people, and people like my grandfather, whose church was bombed, Society Hill Church, who was bombed, and the people who did it were never, ever brought to justice. Now, people can say that, and they have the right to say this, that flag represents the Confederacy. It represents a heritage that a lot of us, a lot of Mississippians are proud of. But where do Black Mississippians and people of color fall into that heritage? The other problem, the other part of that is if we're going to have a museum, and it is the triumph of the civil rights movement, why are we still hanging our hopes and anchoring our identity into that flag? If we don't have anything in common, if the Confederacy doesn't have anything in common with the KKK, which is what I see when I see that flag, the state of Mississippi does have in common things with the KKK. There was a period during our time, there's a period during our history when not only did we have things in common with the KKK, we had members in common with the KKK. We had an agenda in common with the KKK. How can we move forward with a civil rights museum? How can we move forward as a community if we are holding on to things that symbolize terror against our citizens? And that's why I did that billboard.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about some of our youth today, and maybe youth and even adults, are not aware of history as we should be. We're not aware of some of the important things that happened to determine why we have rights today. So would you say that, I'm sure you would agree, that it is important to pursue education, support the museum, and pursue education, and to know your history beyond what you're taught in school?
Well, I mean, I think that's a part of this thing that I was referring to earlier, is that how do we tell the best story of who we are and what we are? And the way to do that is that we tell all of our stories, the good and the bad. And the series that I'm in, the Book of Negroes, it is about a piece of history that I had no knowledge of at all. It's about how African Americans fought on the side of the British during the Revolutionary War. Thousands of them fought on the side of the British during the Revolutionary War, and they were called the Black Loyalists. And as a result of them fighting on the side of the British, they were promised freedom and land in Canada. So all these people migrated to Canada to live this other life, right? I had no knowledge of that. I thought of myself as a pretty smart kid when I was in school. Like I said, I was like, if I read 5 more pages of my history book, I'll be 5 more pages smarter. I meant that, you know? But I had no clue. I had no idea. I mean, my extension of my knowledge of the civil rights, of the Revolutionary War and the African American contribution to it, was that Crispus Attucks was one of the first people who died. And that's it. That's all I knew. I had no idea that these people essentially, you know, waged a revolution of their own, and they set out to start a whole new life in Canada, and this is a history that all of us, black, white, we all, African Americans, African Canadians, white people, black people, we all share this piece of history. Now, the fact that I don't know that about myself affects how I think of who I am. And it's so important for us to see that, you know, my history is just as much the history of a white woman or a white man. It's a shared history, and February does not suffice in telling the African American history. It's all of our history, and the way we should not segregate each other as people, we shouldn't segregate our history.
Right. Well, talk to us about how you came across that role in the Book of Negroes, and are you selective about the roles you choose? Do you think the roles you choose reflect your values in some way?
Well, I think this definitely does reflect the values that I aspire to. Aminata is the heroine of the Book of Negroes, and she was kidnapped from slavery when she was 11 years old, came to the States, survived the Middle Passage. She escaped slavery, and the bulk of the story is seeing this woman quilt together her life as a free woman all around the world, in Canada, in West Africa, in Great Britain, and ultimately she writes the story of her life. And when I was that 7th grade girl writing that piece that I wrote, and my 7th grade teacher didn't like it so much, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to write something about myself. And Lawrence Hill has created in Aminata a character who says to well-meaning abolitionists, like, I can write my own story, I can read, I can write, I'm proficient in several languages, and I can write my own story. And I think it's an incredible, she's an incredible woman. I mean, she's a feminist. She was making choices about her life that other women, whether they were enslaved or not during that time, could not make, or didn't have the balls to make those choices, or the ovaries, I should say, to make those choices. She carves a wonderful figure of humanity, and I think when people see this person, see this woman, I think you'll want to latch onto her and follow her.
Mm-hmm. And so you've been in movies like The Help and Ray, and just recently Get On Up. So I'm sure you've had to do some research on these characters and do some studying before you actually try to portray a character on film. So just tying things back into education, I mean, you're always going to have to continuously learn and do studying and educate yourself if it means bettering yourself, right?
Yeah. If I could, I would do these kinds of stories all the time, because they make me a better human being, and they make me someone who wants to make the world around her more livable for the people in my life, whether it's my mother who's ailing, my niece and nephew who are the loves of my life, my sister who's my road dog, my boyfriend who I care about so much, and my community. I live every day to make the lives of those people that in my little pocket of the world, to make their lives better. The extension of that is the work that I do on film. Hopefully, I mean, I've been pretty lucky lately that I've had the opportunity to work on things that reflect a history that I did not know about, you know? And if it's not in the books, then thank God somebody is writing it and putting it on screen, because it gives people the opportunity to see it in ways that they wouldn't have had the opportunity otherwise to know.
All right. Well, Aunjanue, other than the Book of Negroes, do you have any other upcoming projects you'd like to talk about?
Well, I am doing this movie. I did this movie called Una Vida, and it's about a woman who is struggling with Alzheimer's disease.
Oh.
Yes. I laugh because I get told like, come on, do a comedy one day. But
Because you've taken on a lot of serious roles.
yeah. But the great thing about these characters that I play is that they are women who are who are going through very difficult times in their lives, or who are, living difficulty, living hardship. But they have a through line, a bloodline of joy. And that's who my ancestors were. That's my grandmother. My grandmother, had it hard, and but she was a joy. She had joy in her life, and that's what got her up in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and appreciate everything you do, and look forward to seeing the Book of Negroes.
Thank you very much. And now I hear your voice. I'm
Yes.
like, that's that woman I hear on the radio.
Yeah, it's me. It's me.
And you'll probably recognize Sharita. She hosts several radio shows here at MPB and produces my radio show as well. Hey, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Conversations.